All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Grow This Academy. I'm Candace Delong. I'm an Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Agent in Hampshire County over in the Eastern Panhandle. Today, we're going to speak about entomology. So entomology is a pretty big question for your gardens, right? You're either loving the insects you see and you think they're really cool and crazy looking, or you despise them because they're demolishing your crops. So we're going to cover a little bit of both of those things today. We're going to talk about how to handle those and what to do when you see good bugs and bad bugs. So for our overview, we're going to give you just a brief introduction to insects, what they are. We're going to talk about integrated pest management, which is a way of looking at how to deal with pests, like the whole picture. We're going to talk about the principles, how to use integrated pest management, and the benefits of using this program. Once we get done with that, we're going to talk about potential problems or the bad bugs you find in your garden. And we're also going to talk about potential helpers or the good bugs. So a little bit of both. So for our insect overview, I actually taught something similar to this to kindergartners earlier this week. Insects have 3 body parts. They have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen, and they have 6 legs, 3 on each side. So those legs come from the thorax section of the insect. Insects, they have an exoskeleton, so they don't have bones on the inside, as you probably know because you've squished them before. They only have a hard outer exoskeleton. So some insects have wings, some don't. That's not a priority for being an insect. And all insects go through metamorphosis. There's complete metamorphosis and incomplete metamorphosis. And we're going to talk about those in a second. But you all probably know that part. So did you know the United States has 91,000 species of insects? And what is crazy about that is those are only the described species. So there are tons of insect species in the United States that don't even have names. Like, we just don't interact with them much as people. So the West Virginia Department of Natural Resources has described 800 moss species in West Virginia. They think there are as many as 2,000 species of moss. So we have a really high insect diversity in our state. So why am I telling you this? Is because there are 91,000 species of insects in the United States. Only a tiny handful of those insects are actually going to cause problems in your garden. Most of them might visit and then leave, and they won't cause any damage at all. So we're going to talk about insects in the garden using integrated pest management as a guideline. You might have heard this before as something farmers use, but you can actually use it in your garden and get really good results. So integrated pest management is a way of looking at the whole system of your garden. You're not just looking at the pest and spraying it in hopes that it goes away. You're really looking at multiple options to deal with the pest so that you can figure out what works best for you to handle the situation. So it focuses on long-term prevention instead of quick, just spray it and hope it works method. So it's a great way to manage pest damage effectively and economically with the least possible hazards of using insecticides. So there are several key principles to IPM. One of them is prevention. This is all about starting your garden off on the right foot, doing your soil tests, doing some of the things we've already talked about in the Grow This Academy so that your plants are happiest in their place in the garden. So they have the right amount of sunlight, they're getting the right amount of water, you've done your soil tests and you've applied fertilizer according to the soil test. Doing all those things is going to help with your insect problems. So that's the first part, is taking those steps for preventive management. The second one is monitoring. And this one I find kind of fun because this is the part where you're actually looking for those insects. So the first step to getting those insects away from your plants is to notice when they're there. If you catch those bad bugs right away, you have a better chance of getting them out of your garden and harvesting your crops effectively. IPM uses targeted control. So there are a lot of options out there, pesticides or even other types of control that are only going to affect the insect that's a problem, and they'll leave the rest of the insects alone. So IPM uses these types of control methods so that we're not affecting the whole environment. We're just kind of targeting that pest that's a problem. IPM also minimizes the risks of using excess pesticides because you're not applying anything unless you know there's an issue. And it's also a more sustainable approach. There are a lot of benefits to using IPM methods. Reduced pesticide use because you're not spraying when there's no bugs to spray for. Improved health from less exposure to pesticides. And more economic savings because if there is nothing to spray, if the bug isn't there and you're not spraying, it's going to save you money on pesticides and your time and effort. So, how to use IPM in the garden? The first thing you need to do is identify the pest. This is the most important thing you can do to managing the bugs in your garden and the insects. You need to determine if that pest is causing any issues, and you need to understand its life cycle and biology so that you know what you're doing will impact the pest. So just like a soil test, we need to identify the pest before we take any action. So in your soil test, you don't want to apply fertilizer before you know you need the fertilizer, right? That would be wasting that fertilizer. So if you know this pest is going to cause an issue, then you deal with it instead of taking action if you don't know what the bug is. Because chances are, if a new bug or insect shows up in your garden, you might not need to do anything at all. So the first thing you do is identify it. When you find these insects, you need to know what plant is it affecting. This is a good thing to think about first because the damage on those plants is most likely caused by an insect that is affecting that plant specifically. There are several of our insect pests that only affect certain types of plants in our garden. So if you can tell your extension agent or somebody else that could help you figure out what it is, what the damage looks like on that plant, that can help you figure out what the insect is. Can you describe the damage? Is it big holes? Is it leaves that look lacy? Is the plant just completely dead? All of those things can help us figure out what insect is causing the damage. Can you see the potential pest? And I'm saying this because some of our insects are sneaky and they will hide from you. So you're going to see the damage, but you might have to look a lot closer to see the insect that's actually causing the damage. So for some examples, our caterpillars that we find on our brassicas, like our kale and our broccoli and cauliflower, they're slow. Those caterpillars aren't just going to get up and jump away, right? You can see those pretty easily, but we also have issues like flea beetles that cause holes in our leaves, and they jump away when you get close to them. So if you can see the damage and then look a little harder for the insect, it can help us figure out what you're dealing with. For identifying insects, there are lots of ways that you can figure out what these are. First, you can use good old-fashioned guidebooks. So here I have some really old versions. Here's a butterfly guidebook, if you're looking at butterflies. And this one is a tree fruit field guide. So if you'd like to be out in the garden without your phone, just have some quiet time, it's cool to have these guides. There are guides that are very specific. So this one is a tree fruit guide. So if you're noticing something on your apple trees or your peach trees, get a specific insect guide to help you figure out what it is. Of course, you can take a picture of those insects and you can send that to your extension agent in your county, and they can help you identify by picture. Better yet, you can catch the bug and bring it to our offices in each county, and we can help you figure it out right then and there with that bug, or we'll do our best. You can also use search engines to figure out what kind of bugs you're looking at. You can just take a picture and go through a search internet browser, and you can kind of get an idea of what kind of bug that is. You can cover your bases. So you could do a Google search and then call the extension office to confirm that that is indeed the insect you're looking at. But knowing what insect you're looking at in your garden can really help you figure out the control. It's also helpful to know the life cycle of those insects. So we need to know the whole biology of these bugs that are affecting our plants. Looking at the whole life cycle can help us determine if there is a vulnerable stage. So a lot of these insect pests, they overwinter in leaf debris or in old crop residue that's left in your garden, places like that. So if you clean those out of your garden, you're taking a lot of those insect pests away with you because they're in there in their egg form or their nymph form or something like that. So knowing the life cycle of each pest is really helpful for control. So our insects go through two different types of metamorphosis. Some insects go through complete metamorphosis. That is, of course, like our hungry caterpillar that hatches from an egg, goes through a caterpillar stage, goes through a pupal stage, and then becomes an adult. So we have several insect pests in the garden that go through that complete metamorphosis. We also have incomplete metamorphosis, which is like our squash bugs, some of our really annoying pests like that. They only go through 3 life stages. So they're going to be an egg on your plant. They're going to turn into a nymph that looks a little bit like the adult, and they'll gradually get larger and look like the adult. So knowing the life cycle of these insects can, again, help you figure out that vulnerable stage so you can apply the right control methods. IPM uses something called a threshold. So we talk about this a lot when we're talking about big farms and gardens. If they see, for one example, if you catch a certain amount of codling moss in your apple orchard, that will signal it's time to spray your insecticide. So you know the pest is there before you're applying anything. You can use this theory in your garden. You just have different thresholds. So there are thresholds out there for all kinds of insect pests, and you can Google them, but you can also make them up depending on how you respond. For example, if I find one cabbage looper on my kale, I will not eat it. So therefore, I know I have to deal with that cabbage looper before they even show up, because even if I harvest it, I know I won't eat it. So my threshold is no moss on my kale plants. But another example, if I see an aphid on my tomato plant, I will probably ignore it. So you as a gardener get to make up your own thresholds, and those thresholds that you made up will determine if you apply insecticides or take action at all. There are several different control methods that you can use. The first is just cultural methods. A cultural method would be just removing that leaf debris, placing row cover over your crops before the season even gets started. You're altering the environment in some way. There are also biological control methods, which involve altering the habitat for more beneficials, or if you have a large greenhouse, that would be bringing in beneficials, which you can purchase, that will take out some of your smaller pests. There are mechanical and physical control methods. This would be pruning the limb off a tree that has tent caterpillar or something like that on it, just totally removing that section, which is a completely viable way to deal with pests. And then the last method is chemical. So when you're working in an IPM mindset, the best thing to do is start with the cultural. How can you make the environment better for your crops? Biological, mechanical, and then the last resort is always our pesticides. All right, and as you move through this IPM way of thinking, write down what you did, and if it didn't work, definitely record that so you don't make the same mistakes again. So this is all about weighing your options and then deciding what works and then keeping track and doing it the right way the next year. All right, so we are going to move on to our bad bugs, or the insects that are most likely to cause issues in your garden. We're going to look at this kind of with a frame set. We're going to start and talk about how to identify the bugs, ways that you can find them. We're going to discuss their life cycle briefly, what crops they're going to damage the most, when you should take action, so this is our threshold, or my personal opinion on what your threshold should be, and then how to take action, or what options you have. So our first problem insect, these are in no particular order, but is the flea beetle. So flea beetles are tiny little 1/10 of an inch beetles that really do look like fleas, and they jump away like fleas. But you probably won't see the beetle first. You'll see the little feeding holes. In the picture, this is an eggplant leaf, and these guys love eggplant, and they're going to put all kinds of holes in your eggplant leaves. So these flea beetles go through complete metamorphosis. So they overwinter in that plant debris in your garden that I've already talked about a little bit. They'll emerge early in spring, probably right about now, if not already. They're going to feed on the roots. The larvae is going to feed on the roots. So if you're seeing holes in your crops, chances are your roots are damaged too. And then the adults are the ones that chew holes through the leaves. These guys, like I mentioned, love eggplant. If I wanted to go grow eggplant in my garden, I would have to put row cover on first thing because they will be attracted to any eggplant that I would put in the ground. They also really love arugula. They attack other types of crops like corn, cabbage, tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, but eggplant and arugula is what they love when I've grown it before. So what you can do, if you've seen these little tiny holes in your garden in previous years, make sure you remove all that plant debris and move any susceptible crops to a new garden bed and then cover it with row cover. That's going to be the easiest way to get them out and start in a new location where the flea beetles can't get to your eggplant and your arugula. So my threshold for flea beetles is I can eat a little bit of arugula with flea beetle damage. So I'm not going to do something about it right away. You can spray them, but in my experience, unless you're a really, really big eggplant lover, you're probably all right without spraying them. So next up is harlequin bugs. These guys are not fun at all. They're definitely the ultimate bad guy, in my opinion. So just like the picture, they're black with bright yellow or orange markings. They're actually an invasive species that has migrated from Central America, so they have not been here forever, but they are very adaptable. They're also in the stink bug family, so they're shaped a little bit like stink bugs, and if you squish them, they also stink. And the control for these harlequin bugs involves a lot of squishing, so you might want to get used to the stinking. These guys go through incomplete metamorphosis, so they will lay eggs on your plants, usually brassicas, like your kale and your cauliflower. Everything likes those. They will lay eggs on them, they'll hatch into little nymphs that kind of look like the adult, and then they'll gradually go through several nymphal instars and become the full adult. So the nymphs and the adults will feed on those brassica crops. You're the same ones as our cabbage worms, so our kale, cauliflower, kohlrabi, cabbage, all of those plants they really like, and they also really like wild brassicas. So we have a lot of weeds, pretty much, like shepherd's purse or wild mustard that they will feed on as well. So if you have a lot of that in a neighboring field, those harlequin bugs out there will migrate to your garden. So be mindful of what other brassicas you have in the area. My threshold for harlequin bugs is if I see them, I need to take action immediately because they can take off and be a big problem. So pick off the adults if you can, get used to squishing them. Or better yet, put row cover on your brassicas immediately and it will keep them off. If these become a big problem, broad spectrum insecticides do work. Pyrethroids, neem oil, spinosad, they will all work on harlequin bugs. Next up is our Mexican bean beetles. These guys are going to use a little bit of camouflage because they look a little bit like ladybugs. They are a different color, and once you get used to finding them, you'll realize they're not our lady beetles. Their bad guys are bean beetles. So these orange beetles are 1/3 of an inch long, and they have 16 black spots on the back. They are definitely more orange in color than a lot of the ladybugs you find. Just like ladybugs, they're oval shaped, and they're a similar species. So if you've seen our ladybug larvae, the larvae for these bean beetles look similar. As you can see in the picture, it kind of looks like a spiky slug, yellow spiky slug. This larvae, the spiky larvae, will eat your beans just like the adult Mexican bean beetles. So if you find any stage of our Mexican bean beetles, squish them and get them out of there. If you've seen them last year, if you saw bugs like this on your beans last year, you can take action now. You can plant beans early. It will attract all the bean beetles to those beans. You can pull them out of the ground, kill them in a black trash bag or something, and then plant a new crop in a couple weeks, and you should be able to avoid most of the beans. Beans are also a good crop to cover with row cover because you will keep the bean beetles away. So while I said that, I'm going to show you an example of row cover. So this is some very used row cover from my garden. It is dirty and has bugs in it. This is typical, it's called Agribon or garden fabric. You can use this to keep out insects. It's also great for season extension, so early season and late season, but it will definitely, if it doesn't have holes in it and it's in good shape, it will keep those bugs off your garden. So to apply this to your crops, you can use these wire hoops. This will keep the fabric off your growing plants. You just stick them into the ground and lay the fabric on top, and then tuck the fabric in with rocks or pots or bags of soil. Anything like that will work. You can buy fancy bags to weigh down the row cover, but you don't need to do that. So when I say row cover, this is a great way to keep insects off your plant. Oops. All right, next up is the tomato hornworm. We were discussing this earlier today, but the first time I saw tomato hornworm damage, I thought a deer walked into my garden and took out like a whole half a plant. That's how much these guys eat. And you might have experienced them before. They take out a big portion of your plant. They blend in. The best way to get these out of your garden is to just pick them off and put them in soapy water or put them somewhere else. But they blend in really, really well. This is a fun task for kids to get the hornworms off your tomato plants. So these caterpillars, they're really large and they have a very prominent horn, kind of like this photo. And the stripes on the side make them blend in with tomato plants. I've been really frustrated looking for them before. And I would say you're almost always going to notice the damage before you actually see the caterpillar. These guys, of course, like their name suggests, love tomatoes, but I've seen them on peppers before, and there's also a similar caterpillar called the tobacco hornworm that I've seen on flowering tobacco flowers. So there's a couple. They look really similar. When to take action, this one is totally up to you. Tomato hornworms will do a lot of damage, but sometimes we let our tomato plants go a little crazy, and we have extra branches on our tomato plants or extra vines, so it's okay if they take out a few of them. There's actually a parasitic wasp that loves tomato hornworms, and every time I've seen a tomato hornworm in my garden, I've also seen parasitized tomato hornworms, so sometimes it's okay to just leave them. All right, next up is another incredibly frustrating bad bug, the squash bugs. These guys, their life cycle is egg, nymph, adults, so there are several, and you've probably seen them, several iterations of squash bugs that show up. Oh, it'll be soon. And the nymphs and the adults will all feed on your squash plants. So any of your cucurbits, your squash, your pumpkins, they'll even attack cucumbers, which is one of your grow this plants, so make sure you're watching your cucumber plants for squash bugs. Watermelons, gourds, any of the above, the squash bugs love them. When to take action on this, my threshold is immediately. I am always checking my squash plants for the eggs. You can see a picture. They're little, they're always going to be on the underside of the leaf. That's kind of where they will start. But don't forget to look on the tops of the leaf, and I've even seen them on the stems of our cucurbits. So they might be anywhere, but the easiest thing you can do is get those eggs out. Scrape them off, squash them, whatever you can do. There's a lot of squashing involved in this IPM session. So if you see them, go ahead and scrape the eggs off. You can use row cover, like I showed you, for squash as well, but squash really need a hand with pollination. So you can't leave that row cover on all year, or your squash flowers won't pollinate and you won't end up with any fruit. So if you use row cover for your squash, make sure you remove it so good bugs can get in and pollinate your squash plants. I've also heard you can set trap boards in your pumpkins in winter squash. Over cool nights, just put a shingle or a piece of wood in your garden, and then wake up early. The squash will be on the board and squish them all that way. So that's a good way to get them out. You can spray these also if it's becoming a big issue in your garden. The same broad spectrum insecticides will work for these guys. And when I say that, I mean what you can get at Home Depot. Just check on the label and look for squash bugs, and that should work. Always follow the label when you're applying those insecticides. All right, so aphids, we're just going to do one last one. Aphids, this is an insect that you've probably all seen. They're tiny. They're on the leaves of all kinds of different plants. There's all kinds of different aphids. The picture here is of woolly apple aphid. This one attacks the roots of apple trees and some other trees, and it will attack the roots. You might not see it, but every once in a while it'll attack a stem, and it always gives out this white mushy material. So these aren't great, you don't want them, but every time I've seen these aphids have been parasitized by little wasps. So there'll be dead aphid bodies that turn brown, and little wasps have ate that aphid and have flown away off to find more aphids somewhere. Aphids, my threshold is sometimes to leave the aphids because they are attracting those good bugs. So if you have a few aphids, it's not always terrible because your ladybugs and other good bugs are gonna come and eat those aphids. So I wouldn't take immediate action on aphids. I would kind of watch them. And when I first see them, I always squish them. That's a good first step. But give those aphids a little bit of a chance to bring in some beneficials before you take action on them. All right, we're gonna do one more pest. And this is another big issue, the caterpillars on brassicas. So I've discussed this a little bit. I do not like worms on my kale. There are a bunch of different species that basically go through the same life cycle and attack the same plants. So we have our imported cabbage worms, our cabbage loopers, and diamondback moss. They all attack cabbage species, broccoli, kale, kohlrabi, all of those guys. My best recommendation is to plant all of them together and cover it with row cover. There's another option for those worms, and that's called BT. It's an insecticide. It's actually a bacteria. And what happens is you spray the bacteria on your brassica crops, the caterpillars will eat it and they will die. So it's kind of a biological control because you're using a bacteria to kill those caterpillars. Oh, sorry about that. We lost our audio for a second. We're briefly talking about some beneficial insects that you want in your garden. So our good bugs. We have lots of types of bees. I'm not sure if you guys missed that, but we definitely want to encourage all types of bees in our garden. Bee houses like this are for our solitary bees, our mason bees and our leafcutter bees. They will make their homes in things like this. So you can encourage those good bees in your garden. We also really want our parasitic wasps. I think I've mentioned it twice already. This picture of a tomato hornworm with the little rice hanging out of it, those are the parasitic wasp cocoons. And what happens, it's kind of like a science fiction story, but those wasps lay their eggs on the tomato hornworm. They will hatch, the larvae will hatch, they will eat the tomato hornworm, and then they will fly away to get other tomato hornworms. So if you see a tomato hornworm that has little rice grains sticking out of it, leave that in your garden because it's basically a home for parasitic wasps. So we definitely want to keep those. That's another reason why I don't stress too much about the tomato hornworms because they usually get parasitized. Of course, our ladybugs, they are really great predators for us. They eat aphids, they eat whiteflies, they eat thrips, all kinds of bugs that cause damage in our gardens. So encouraging ladybugs is one of the best things you can do. And we also have lacewings. These bugs you've probably seen at your light at night outside your front porch. They like hanging out there. They are also really great predators. They take out the same kind of insect pests that ladybugs do. And lastly, these are minute pirate bugs. They are ferocious little guys. They're tiny, very, very small, and they're kind of multicolored on their back. And you might think that you've never seen one, but if you spend a little bit of time in your garden, they might literally jump on you. So you can see them pretty easily. So once you start looking for them, you'll see them. But they are great predators as well. So just an overview of keeping good bugs in your garden. What you want to do is you want to have flowers that bloom all season long. So we have certain flowers that are blooming now. You want to add in flowers that will bloom later in the summer and even flowers that'll bloom in the fall so that you're always having some sort of pollen source for those good bugs. You can give them a little source of water, just small, not very deep water. That'll keep those beneficial insects happy. And you don't need to eliminate all the pests. Some pests are okay because they're going to keep bringing in the good bugs. So if you see a couple aphids, squish them, but maybe leave a few of them for the ladybugs. And that's all I have. Are there any questions?
We have several. Do Asian lady beetles do the same things as ladybugs?
I would say we don't want the Asian lady beetles. So I think they are kind of predators, but that's completely different species, and they are more of a pest themselves. So I would say if you see Asian lady beetles, get out your old vacuum and get them out of there.
Somebody said, I've been hardening my sprouts and noticed a few of them had an insect that was trying to burrow itself down in the soil. Reminded me of a silverfish, but it was slender and dark brown.
Can you put a picture in the comments section and we can take a look at that for you? And yeah, if I don't answer your question, I will go back to our comments and I can answer it on there. So I'll find your question if I don't get it.
Somebody wants to talk about squash vine borers.
Yes.
Does vertical growing help to avoid them?
I don't think so. I think you're still going to have the issue with the vine borer at basically at the soil level. So we didn't talk about squash vine borers, but if you have them, they will take out your squash plant overnight. I don't think vertical growing will help with squash vine borers. I would plant multiple squash plants and just keep an eye out for the damage, because you can kind of dig the larvae out of there or spray when they're on the outside, but I don't think vertical growing will help. They're still going to find you, sadly.
Somebody said when the sound went dead, they thought someone had squished you.
The bugs would have their revenge then, I guess.
And the person asking about the silverfish-like thing said they don't have a picture, but they will send one later.
I'll look for it.
Okay. And somebody else asked, we are trying container gardening this year. Grow bags, buckets, pots, hanging baskets, on steps, railings, plant stands. Should we expect less pests or similar to what you would see growing in the ground? And any special concerns with container gardening in regard to pests?
I would say you're going to see similar pests. If it's your first year growing in these containers on your porch or in your yard, it might not be that bad of a year because the insects haven't found you yet. I would make sure your containers are really well watered and well fertilized so that your plants are nice and healthy, and that should be able to outdo any insect problems. So just make sure you're watering them really well and they have enough to eat, and you should be okay. It'll be the same pests though when you see them.
Talk about the survey.
Yes, so we do have a survey for you. I think it's on a QR code and we'll put it in the chat box. The code is Ladybug, so please fill that out for us. And we also, next week, we will have a Q&A session. So if you have more questions for us at WVU Extension, we can try to get those questions answered next week. So be thinking of those.
And they can direct message those to the Grow This.
Yeah, if you do have questions, you can direct message those to the Grow This page, and we can make sure those get answered next week. And if you have questions ahead of time, it's great because we can make sure we have really thorough answers. That always helps us out. All right, that's all we have. Thank you all for tuning in today. We'll see you again soon.